You grew up in a time that was so interesting, right? Because like in the 70s is when the Vietnam War ends and a lot of people are suddenly hooked on heroin. And then in the 80s, you got the crack era. So during that time, it's just like to live through that and witness all those things. What do you remember about kind of like the drug epidemic in New York during that time?
Man, what I remember was, we'd see needles around, like hallways. I remember specifically picking up an envelope. So obviously it was apparent. It was right in front of the school. I picked it up. It was a little yellow envelope. Had spoon in it. It had other, needle, the whole kit. But it was like in a little tiny uh, yellow envelope. And I remember, showing my mother, and she was like, she just snatched it from me and just, don't worry, this is no good. And I mean, and this was walking into kindergarten or first grade at the most.
Wow.
So yeah. So thinking back now that you're asking, that yeah, that was a parent that dropped that.
So prior to
Yeah.
you getting into music, right? Were you like in uh ever like getting into the streets, or you were always like focused on school and music and kind of being on the more straight and narrow path?
Yeah, I was. Yeah, more of the straight narrow path. Like I'd hang around people, right? But it wasn't never. And I guess we could get into that a little later because I know you like you said, you like to do things in order. Um, but just in a nutshell, I've always been around street people, and but I've never been involved in anything, so to speak. You know, it's almost like, hey, and it's just something that not I'm not thinking about it like, oh, I'm gonna stay away, but it was just like, hey, they knew he's not into this. Um, but doing the music, you're around that all the time. Not all the time, but you know what I'm saying. But it was
Right.
more,
You kind of like there's that lifestyle that is surrounding you in a sense.
yeah, it's surrounding you, right? You're not gonna escape it, but it doesn't mean you have to participate. If you get,
Mhm.
what I mean, that makes sense. So yeah, it was more. Listen, I couldn't even when I was in high school and other people were buying turntables. I couldn't fathom the everybody got into cars and they sold their equipment to get cars. I couldn't. I in my head, I couldn't wrap my head around that idea. I was like, how do you sell your equipment to buy a car? I didn't understand it.
Because the music was so important to you.
Yeah, it was so important. I mean, it was every day. I was coming home and practicing. So it was the only thing I was really interested in. Because honestly, with school, I mean, yeah, I do my schoolwork, but I was never into school like that. And that's why I think fast forwarding even to today, I'm a very free, a free thinker, you know, not so much, I think the indoctrination didn't, maybe probably in some things, but in other things later on in life, it's like, it's not, well, not that I ever was married to anything they ever taught me in school, so to speak.
Gotcha. So do you remember the exact moment that you fell in love with hip hop, or was it just kind of like a natural progression over time?
Yeah, it was just a natural progression. It was one step into the other, into the next, into the next. From like I said, from watching the Infinity Crew, um, seeing guys like the Disco Twins around the way. Um, then you start getting into it a little bit. I would see Herbie Azar um, do his thing, right? They had the sheesh, I forget the name of the crew, but Kid and Play was in it, and Turn Up Brothers. So from seeing things like that, and I went to school with her, to high school with her. So honestly, when I saw him with a reel to reel, and this is still in high school, I see him with a reel to reel, ready to give it to Jelly Bean Benitez at the Funhouse. I'm like, what is that? Like, what are you doing? He's like, no, I'm going to give you this thing. It's some music I do. It's like, really? I was like, wow. So, and I believe it was, at the time, um, it was just one of their demos, but, Herbie, Herbie's work. But yeah, that was also an inspiration. That was that was that moment like, wow, look at what he's doing at like 16, 17 years old.
So how did you end up getting the
Yeah.
name the Mighty Vic?
Um, I think that was Riggs and Carlito from the source. I was reading an article when I was working with artifacts, and it said, I think Duro was the engineer, and it said the Mighty V.I.C behind the boards. So they actually gave me that name.
So prior to that, did you just go by VIC?
Yeah, V.I.C. Right.
And then it's an acronym for what?
It's just Vic.
Oh, okay. So but you just stylized it as the
Yeah, they
okay,
just you're right. Yeah,
gotcha.
and then it became the Mighty.
Hmm.
Yes. So which I believe it was Fashion, Al Tariq
Right.
that that started calling me VIC.